We're really excited to have all you guys. My name is Stephanie. I'm full-time at USRowing. If I haven't seen you guys in another session, I am in the L&D department and I also oversee our summer camps. So, especially our U19 summer camps. So I'm sure I will be emailing a lot with you guys as the summer gets closer. But I'm really excited for this session. We've got Caroline Ricksen. So she has a long career as a coxswain. She was a coxswain at Stanford. She also medaled as a coxswain at the U19 and U23 World Championships. And she was our runner-up coxswain for the Paris Olympic team this past summer. And so we will hand it off to her to talk about making the jump to college.
Hey everyone, happy Sunday, wherever you are. Hope you're doing well. If folks feel comfortable turning their camera on, it's always helpful for me to chat with people face to face. So if folks are comfortable with that, that would be awesome. Just to get us started, at any point, feel free to throw any questions in the chat directly. I prefer to kind of do Q&A as we go, and then happy to also do a Q&A at the end on topics not related to jumping to college. Awesome. Hi, Emma. Hi, Lily. So first, a little bit more about me. I'm Caroline. Been coxing for 12 years, which is crazy. Feels like it's been not that much time. But I'm definitely getting older. It's crazy that I'm not in college anymore. And coxing is what I do in my free time. So I work a full-time job and I cox when I can. National team experience, I coxed the U19 Women's Four in 2018 to a bronze medal. Coxed the U23 Women's Four to a bronze medal in 2023, and then have been involved in the senior team for the last couple of years. But I was the runner-up coxswain for the 2024 Olympic Games for the women's eight. So was super involved in the Olympic selection. And then for college, I coxed the varsity at Stanford all 4 years I was there. Won Pac-12s my senior year, was the runner-up at the NCAA championships, and was a three-time All-American. We didn't have All-Americans during COVID, so that was the 1 year I was not an All-American. In high school, before college, I coxed at Oakland Strokes, coxed the varsity women there, won the national championship in 2016 and 2017, and then got a silver medal in 2018. So had a ton of fun there. And then right now I live in San Francisco. I work a full-time role running operations at an AI startup. If anyone's interested, you can check out my LinkedIn. You can find all that stuff there. But it's super fun. I have a good time. I almost feel like I'm like the coxswain of the company. So that's cool. Um, and I find myself in a boat pretty frequently, whether it's hopping in a boat ahead of the Charles, whether it's going out to a selection camp, whether it's going to California Rowing Club, jumping in a boat there. Anytime I can, I always try to find myself in the coxswain seat. Cool. So today we're going to talk about transitions. And there are a lot of things that we could be talking about today, but specifically, we're going to talk about making a transition to a new team or transitioning to a new level of the sport. So that could look like changing high school teams, going from high school to college, going from college to a club team, anything of that sort. But you might recognize and maybe have had some transitions already in the sport, but they can be challenging. Transitions generally in life are hard and are difficult, but I think making the transition in the sport can be incredibly difficult as you're going from something that's comfortable, a team you know, a set of athletes you know, a coach you understand, to a completely new environment where you don't know what the expectations are, you don't know the technical standards, you don't know the athletes. It's hard. So today we're going to talk specifically about the jump from high school to college or the jump to going to national team camps, and when you show up with a new group of people, how to approach that and really make yourself stand up. Cool. So my number one advice and like where I always start when I get to any sort of new environment. So this is true when I showed up at Olympic selection camp. This is true when I showed up at Stanford my freshman year. But remembering what my job as a coxswain is and like what I need to prioritize. So first, safety of my crew. That needed to be number one. Second, execution of practice. Needed to steer well, needed to run the drills correctly, and also need to communicate with the other coxswains and boats on the water. And third, needed to be able to communicate with my crew. So coxing the piece, demonstrating boat feel, giving splits or feedback in accordance with the expectation. But if I couldn't do number one well in a new environment, then I couldn't do number 2 well, and then I couldn't do number 3 well. So really making sure that I hit number 1 first, and then I like unlocked myself to then focus on number 2 and then focus on number 3. So usually when I get to a new environment, the first week looks like really safety and just execution of practice. Super simple, not getting super competitive, but just doing the simple things super well and being consistently at a high standard and high bar of safety and execution. If you're running the wrong drills every day, no one cares what you're saying in pieces because you can't run drills. So that's kind of how I like to think about it. Like, even if you're doing amazing stuff in like the power tens, if you can't run a practice and you're not keeping your crew safe, it does not matter. So that's kind of how I approach being in a new environment, is doing the number 1 and number 2 things incredibly well at a high, high, high degree of consistency, and then starting to throw in some of the more stylistic things once I feel like I have everyone's trust. Cool. Any questions so far on like the role of the coxswain, how to think about this approach to a new environment, or anything at this point? No? Okay, cool. So first, like I said, keep it simple. Less is more. So there's no need to try to do anything fancy. If you're coming into a new team, it's your first day on the water, you have 8 new rowers you've never worked with before, it is way better to get out there, to learn the body of water, to kind of stay quiet, just focus on steering, then try to cox a piece and be super technical and like show off all your skills. I really think about it as a ramp up. So, like I said earlier, your first few days are really an adjustment into the new setting. And then eventually you get to add in more flair. Um, okay, I had a question in the chat. I'm going to read it out loud. When starting in college, should we specify to the rowers that we will be keeping it simple, or is that generally expected? So I would say you don't need to make an announcement that you're going to keep it simple and really like focus on your adjustment. I would say when you show up, you can just like do the simple things really well and then slowly start to mix in like a little bit more boat feel, a little bit more technique, a little bit more personal individualization. Um, but I don't think anyone would be surprised if you show up and there's like, it's very simple, very cookie cutter, very standard. Um, I've done that in every single environment. And then like once you start to add new things and people are like, whoa, that's cool. Like you added something really specific and niche. And you're like, yeah, because I know how to do that, but I just I haven't done it yet. So I think like starting small and then giving yourself a base to build off of is the best approach. Cool. So yeah, starting simple. You really want to gain the trust of the coaches and the athletes and be super reliable. And so, like I said, if you can't run the drills correctly, the coach is not going to trust you to cox a 2,000-meter piece side by side with other crews. So doing those really simple things super well and just having a really high bar of consistency. Cool. Second, be a team player. I think this one really goes understated. Oftentimes, when you show up to a new environment like college or like a national team camp, the focus is on trying to like make the team, make the boat, make the seat, when really there's such an advantage to focus on every single day, just like getting a little bit better. And if you focus every single day on like making one step forward, you see the payoff in the long run. Remembering it's a marathon, not a sprint. So if I show up to college and I'm focused on coxing the varsity 8 at NCAA's, which is in June, it's going to be a really long year. So you can set a goal for yourself to cox the varsity 4, but focusing on every single day, trying to make one step forward and contributing to the team, contributing to the team culture, and getting to know the team that you're working with. Part of being a coxswain is understanding the team's needs. And so the more that you can be a team player and contribute to the team success as a whole, the more you will also stand out as a coxswain. Just remembering that you're not there to make yourself look good and to show off your skills, but you're there to advance the team and keeping that top of mind. That's super important. Something else I think about when making the jump to college as well is it is 4 years. You have a long time. It is not normal to come in your freshman year and to just start coxing the varsity eight immediately. So just remembering and giving yourself patience that there is a learning curve and like going with that learning curve of not knowing what you're doing for the first few months and then having to adjust over time. Um, I think what's also really cool about NCAAs, if you're going to row at a D1, D2, or D3 women's program, like I did, is there's a team points trophy. So at the end of the season, it's not just based on the varsity eight's performance, but on the varsity eight, the second varsity eight, and the four. So everyone's performance matters. So it's not just about that one coxswain that's in the varsity eight, but it's about the entire team's performance. And also, even those not racing at NCAAs, how they helped contribute to the team's success throughout the season. So I find focusing on driving the team forward to be A, much more sustainable than just focusing on your personal success, B, much more fun, and C, much more effective. Because if you're pushing the team forward, you're also pushing yourself forward. Any questions on that distinction of like what it looks like to push yourself versus push the team? Cool. Awesome. Third, ask questions. This one probably comes off as pretty straightforward. But I think when you show up in a new environment, it can be scary to raise your hand and it can be scary to use your voice. You don't want someone to think that you're asking a silly question. You don't want to be the one person that raises their hand. But let me tell you, if you are asking a question, other people also have the same question. So it is great that you are raising your hand and using your voice. Um, Also, the more that you can ask questions and create dialogue with the coaching staff and within the team, the better. Folks will get used to your voice, folks will get used to your curiosity, and I think it creates a dialogue that is super beneficial for you and for everyone else. Um, but I also think that you want to ask questions to everyone, alumni, current athletes, coaches, current coxswains, and more. So these questions will look different for each of these different types of persona. To alumni, I would ask, before I went to college, I asked the alumni coxswains, tell me more about your experience when you were at Stanford. What went well? What would you do differently? What advice would you give to someone my age? And that was huge. I felt like I was given all sorts of little tips that helped me advance and like skip over any small little mistakes I would made. Of course, I still made mistakes, but I was able to mitigate some of them by getting the heads up from folks who had done it before. Um, so would definitely recommend that. And if you're going to university program, you can ask your coach to put you in contact with an alumni coxswain who's done it before. And I'm sure they would be more than happy to chat with you, give you some pointers, and give you some advice. Current athletes. Ask all the questions to your teammates, the more the merrier, whether it's little things like, what do I wear to practice? What do I bring to practice? Where is the boathouse? What time is practice? That's what your teammates are there for. So the more you can ask them questions, whether it's little logistics or little things about the team strategy, the team's technical approach, things like that, super important. Coaches, again, I think when you get into a new environment, you're working with a new coach, it can feel scary to start that dialogue with them. But the more you can be comfortable asking your coaches questions, understanding their expectations, and getting clarity from the coaching staff, the more you are able to perform your job to their expectations. So when I got to college, scheduled weekly meetings with our head coach where I met with him weekly, went through recordings, or chatted about whatever was top of mind. Sometimes that was something that I needed to focus on in practice, something that he wanted our eight to focus on in the next few weeks. We would review video, things like that. But that just created a super comfortable dialogue between the two of us that allowed us to feel comfortable whenever anything came up that was feedback for me or feedback for him from myself. Um, so I would definitely schedule those one-on-ones. And a lot of times coaches won't schedule those. So going out of your way to reach out and get that on the calendar is super helpful. Have also done that on national team levels as well to just like be proactive, get things on the calendar, and have a comfortable dialogue. I've found that to be super helpful. And then current coxswains. I think this is so understated is getting to know the coxswains that you're working with. For example, when I was at Stanford, I got super close with the coxswains that I overlapped with when we were there, and we were a little power squad. On the water, if we didn't hear what the drill was, we would ask each other, "What's the drill? How many strokes? When are you pausing? When are you stopping?" We were in constant communication. And I think being on the same page as your fellow coxswain just creates a more cohesive unit that allows you to do your job better. But when you're joining a new team, you want to understand how that unit functions. So, understanding their expectations of communication, if you meet off the water before you go out, everything from that point. Do they like to call things into? Do they like to call things on this one? What is the standard for the team? That is so important because every coxswain unit does things a little bit differently. So making sure you're all on the same page when you show up and before you go out for the first time together really allows you to align and keep everything moving in the right direction. I really think like that, if I can emphasize anything, asking questions to the coxswains you work with before day one or as you're adjusting is so, so important. And that can range again, anything from what is the coach looking for in this drill? What does coach mean when they're saying X, Y, or Z thing? Um, at this part of the body in the water, where am I supposed to be relative to this channel marker? Little things like that. But asking from people who have done it before rather than trying to just figure it out yourself. There are people who have done it and there are people who have the answers. So help yourself by asking the right people the right questions. Awesome. Okay, we had a question. This might be specific with different programs, but I'm going somewhere with the coxswain coach. Should I still try and create the same relationship with the head coach or stay and talk more with the cox specific coach? So I would recommend you schedule meetings with both coaches. So the coxswain coach will definitely be very, very specific on your development, listening to recordings, doing things like that. And I think because you'll have that weekly meeting with them, you could maybe do an every other week with the head coach or whatever coach you work most closely with on the water. But I do think it's really important, like if you are constantly working with, if I was your assistant coach and we were working together on the water every day, I think it's really important that you meet with them as well because they will see things different than what the coxswain coach sees. So I think it's really nice to get the different perspectives from the different coaches. And again, like the more dialogue, the better. So like I was always in constant communication with every single coach, not just our head coach, because they would all have different feedback for me. And I found the more feedback, the better. And every coach will see things a little bit differently. So it's nice to get different perspectives. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. Listen for feedback on the water and on land. So this probably comes off as pretty obvious and is something you've heard time and time and time again. But something I do every time I'm in a new environment is after a session, after a practice, I will choose someone random or someone who I haven't selected before, pull them aside after the row and ask them for feedback. So if I had Emma in my boat yesterday, I would have pulled Emma aside after practice and asked her for specific pointed feedback on things that she liked, things that she thinks that I should continue to do, and then maybe some things I should focus on trying out or building upon. And I think that can be really scary. Like these are folks you don't know, they're your new teammates, but they're going to tell you exactly what's working and then exactly what you need to focus on. So it's like getting like a special study guide for the test and they give you all the answers and then you just have to make the changes. And I would do that with someone different every single day. So if I was with Emma yesterday, I would do it with Lily tomorrow. I would do it with Beth the next day. And then maybe like a few weeks later, I would check back in with Emma and see if she's noticed any changes. Um, Something I would really emphasize is you will get both positive and constructive feedback. So being aware that you might be told to do something different than the way you're currently doing it, and that's okay. That's positive. You're in a new environment, it's not going to be the same, and you get to adjust to a new mold and create a new version of yourself in this new environment. Definitely stay true to your coxswain style, stay true to yourself, but the expectations will be slightly different. So making sure you adjust to that accordingly. Any questions on how to approach feedback, how to ask for feedback, how to make it not awkward, anything like that? Okay, cool. Generally, I found, especially in college, like people are not awkward about feedback and usually have strong opinions. So they will usually be pretty direct with you, and it's usually pretty straightforward. Awesome. Understand the coach and the team priorities. So this one I think aligns with everything we've gone over so far. But every single team runs a little bit differently. I've noticed my high school and college teams ran differently. So my college coach expected the Coxswains to do things slightly differently. Everything was on this one, never say into, always steer one boat length apart. Um, there were very specific things that he asked of us Coxswains that I had not done in high school. So I would make sure to understand what your coach expects and what kind of coxswain style that they ask for. And then also what the team needs. Does the team need someone who's going to be calling split a lot and holding them accountable? Or does the team need someone who's more focused on motivating, more focused on technique? Really understanding what the team likes and looks for in a coxswain, because every team's going to be a little bit different. Again, like in college, it was definitely a little bit more focused on like split standards. We were side by side all the time. It was super focused on racing, super focused on like being hype, being competitive. And then when I stepped up to the national team, it's much more focused about internal boat speed. These athletes are the best in the country when you get to the national team. So they maybe don't need as much motivation. They're already incredibly motivated to get to where they are today. So they need more technical feedback. They need more information. They need more data. They need more splits, but they need less motivation. They need less like rah hype. So understanding that change and what the athletes need, and then adjusting my coxswain style to be aligned with that. That makes sense? Cool. And I think this one like really allows you to stand out. And I think you learn what the priorities of the team are and what the team wants by asking for feedback, asking questions, and creating that dialogue with your coaching staff. So like the more you can do that, the more they're going to be comfortable telling you what they expect and if you are meeting those priorities. Amazing. So that was all on like the general adjustment to college and like how to step into a new space, how to make the most of it, how to really stand out as a skilled coxswain. So I will stop sharing there, but I'm happy and excited to chat through any of that, any specific questions, any specific scenarios, maybe like how I focused on my transitions generally. But if anyone wants to come off mute, throw a question in the chat. Also happy to chat about my coxswain experience in general, any part of it.
Or I just would like to add, we have a pretty small group here, so I think this is a great opportunity to have some real conversations. I'm guessing that most of you guys as coxswains don't have the opportunity to sit down with somebody like Caroline all the time. So, do you guys have any specific questions? What Ellie has a question. Have you ever had a disrespectful rower?
Yeah, Ellie, that's a great question. So I've worked a lot of different athletes across the board. And every once in a while, you have an athlete that is maybe a little bit more opinionated, feels strongly, or maybe delivers their feedback in a way that is less respectful. Like, I can't believe you did that. Can you please, like, can you just do this differently next time? Or like, your job is so easy. Why didn't you just do it right? Can't you just steer straight? And when I have that type of attitude from an athlete, what I try to do is respond with something like, I'm doing my best. Thanks for your input. I got this, and kind of just like close it down, calm them, address that you've heard them, you've heard what they say, but not let it rattle you, especially when you're in the boat. When you get some sort of like charged comment like that, knowing that there's nothing you can do about it, you are doing the best. And then what I would do is off the water, follow up with that athlete and be like, hey, I heard what you said. Just wanted to follow up and see if there was anything specific. If they are disrespectful again, I think you can be polite, say thank you so much, really appreciate it, and then close the conversation. If it continues to be an issue where that athlete is disrespectful of you and not allowing you to do your job, at that point, I would bring it to a coach. So sometimes if an athlete is disrespectful, they're trying to do your job for you, or they're just not treating you with respect that you need, I would highly recommend if it is a recurring issue, like 2 to 3 times, I would bring it to a coach and then they can talk to the athlete directly. Um, I highly recommend doing that. That usually solves all the problems. But as a coxswain, I think the best thing to do is respond with respect, kill them with kindness, and be just like, yep, got it. Thank you. That's it. End of message. There's no point or need to go back and forth and snap back at them. Just being like, yep, got it. Thank you. Heard it. Really appreciate it. I found that that's the best approach. They feel heard, they feel validated, but you also don't continue to stir the pot and get everyone worked up. It can be really distracting. Got it, Ellie. Yeah, so I think the coaches probably feel the same exact way. So feel free to bring it up with your coaches. I'm sure that they would be happy to chat to the athlete. But the more that you can just be like kind and pleasant and focus on doing your job, the better. Awesome. I got a few direct messages. So there was one that, what was one of the most challenging aspects when joining a new team or club? Um, this is a really good question. I think like first and foremost, just understanding the little things like when is practice? How do they operate? When you show up, what is the warm up? Things like that. Um, But I often found when joining a new team or club, it's really understanding like what the standard is, like what is good. So when I was in high school, when I was in a youth women's eight, going like 6:30, 6:40 was pretty fast. And then when I got to college, 6:30 or 6:40 was like pretty slow. And so I had to learn that and adjust my expectations accordingly and make sure I was holding the right bar of what was good and what was speed. And so that was getting to college, having the dialogue with my coach, and then getting used to what those new numbers and expectations were. I think that I found to be really hard because if you've never been in a boat that's going 6:15, how do you know what that's supposed to feel like? So I would say really understanding like the new standards is super important, but being patient with yourself while you adjust to that. Okay. Do you want to read Lily's question? I feel like it's just
Yeah, we have.
talking, so I feel like the change in voices.
You're good. So Lily asked if you can go over the transition to college in general and if you have any tips on how to adjust to a new Coxswain group.
Yeah. So my transition to college, when I transitioned to Stanford, we showed up to school in, I'm trying to remember, in like end of September. And then we started practice pretty quickly, I think on the first day of class. But the team was super organized in which like they sent out this is our practice schedule. The vans will pick you up at this time on this day. You kind of knew what you were expecting. And you were also on our team, you were paired with a buddy from the older class. So you like had a go-to person for all of your questions. And I found that super, super helpful. When I transitioned to college, there actually were no older coxswains. There was one, she was a walk-on and she's awesome. But it was the one sophomore who was a walk-on, and then we had three in the freshman class. So it was like a little crazy. We were all new and we were all trying to learn the ropes together. But I think that allowed us to like really lean on each other in the transition. And I think like when we made that adjustment, we just learned to be really patient with each other, confirm things with each other. Like I remember on the first day of practice, I texted the other coxswain in my class. I was like, "What are you wearing to practice? Are you bringing a hat? Are you bringing Oakleys? Like, are you going to lift? Are you planning to do the lift?" Little things like that, and just making sure that you're on the same page. I think it can be really easy to feel like, oh, this is the other coxswain in my class, so I'm going to be competitive against them and not tell them anything. That is not advantageous to anyone involved. The more you can be on the same page, it's 4 years. The more that you can be friends, the more that you can work together and focus on advancing the team's goals, the better. Um, but I found like in practice, generally adjusting to the new coxswain group, there are a lot of logistics to iron out. everything from how you steer together, the way you want to call drills, the body of water, things like that. So really adjusting to the coxswain group. I also at Stanford, we did a weekly meeting with just the coxswains. And usually we do this during like an afternoon erg session or right before an afternoon erg session. And it would just be the coxswains. And sometimes one of our coaches would join, sometimes it was just us. But we did this every single week starting the first week of school. And this was time for us to align as like a brain trust and as a group. And I found that to be the most beneficial session that we ever had was like every week we would sit down and realize that all of us were confused on the same thing and had been miscommunicating about something. And then we could easily make the change the next day. But getting on the same page and communicating created space to then make the change. Um, I also, like when I was a senior, we would be in these coxswain meetings and the freshmen would ask very specific questions about specific drills we were doing, what the coaches were expecting. So I recommend if you get to university and there is not that weekly meeting with just the coxswain unit, I would recommend asking to implement that. Like that's badass and cool to come from a freshman of like, hey, can we please implement this so that we as coxswains can continue to work together as a unit? That answer your question, Lily? Cool. Happy to go into any of that more. I think every transition to college looks a little different based on the team, but I think the biggest things are like A, logistics, like where do I need to be and when? And then B, like I think really learning how to run a practice with a new group of people. Like, do you use hand signals like in two, or do you use like way enough? Like what is the expectation? I think aligning on those is key.
And Lily had a second question that I think a lot of the toxins are wondering. Do you have any tips for selection camp or getting invited to something like U23 or the senior team?
Yeah. Um, so I'll do the second part of the question first. So getting invited to U23 or the senior team, I would say the things that you can do during the year to really make yourself stand out for that is focus on building your team. Like I was saying earlier, the more that you push your team to reach a new height, the more you're going to grow with them. If you're on a top performing team and you are the top coxswain of a top performing team, you will be more likely to get an invite to the selection camp. You have familiarity with how fast those boats are going. You have familiarity with that high level of speed. But the more that you can really drive your team forward, the more it drives yourself. So I think really focusing on that team component. I also think the more that you can be in touch with those on the US rowing side of things who run the pathways and communicating to them that it's a goal of yours, going to the identification camps, sending in recordings, doing all of that, huge. Um, my freshman year, I also sat down with our head coach partway through the season when things were looking pretty good. Um, and I said, hey, one of my goals is by my senior year, I want to Cox on the U23 team. And he was like, okay, like, let's make it happen. It's like we would continue to work together and he would help me focus on specific things that would help me when I got to that next level. Um, and it was really, really helpful. So that's what I'd focus on, like U23 senior is like getting comfortable on your team, driving your team forward, doing well on your team, and then also having that conversation with your coach and like they can help you with that transition, getting eyes on you, getting in contact with the right team, all that fun stuff. But the number one thing is like drive your team and drive yourself. Like set your goals and like do it. Um, that's kind of the best thing you can do. Okay, another question I got. Oh, wait, tip for selection camp. Sorry. When you get to selection camp, same thing. Super short amount of time. Usually it's like 3 weeks, and it's usually like 1.5 weeks to 2 weeks before they make the first cut. So it's like a very condensed amount of time. If you show up and you are a coxswain who cannot steer straight and cannot run drills effectively, you will be cut. Like again, like you need to be able to do the simple things super well. So I think focusing on those things, and then similarly when you're coxing pieces, focusing on steering straight, calling seats, telling them the rate, telling them the split. Keep things simple. Don't get too fancy with it. At the end of the day, Everyone wants a coxswain who can do things correctly, consistently. I found myself doing the best, like at Olympic selection, got positive feedback because I was consistently accurate and consistently doing things correctly. And like that goes way further than you'd ever think. So just focused on like being consistent. And then eventually, yeah, you can add in a little bit more flair after the first week, but like that will take you so far. Um,
And I'll
okay.
Can
Yeah.
I piggyback on that just because I want
Yes.
to update on because the selection process, especially for U19, is a little bit different now. And I don't know if any of you guys joined us for our camps webinar last year, but I would highly encourage you to watch that because Brett goes into a lot of detail on the differences in selection now coming down from Yosi, especially this year is a little bit different. So there are no cuts at selection camp, but I'm pretty sure they're only inviting 2 coxswains per gender. And it's basically whether the boat hit standards or not. So it's basically, are you going to worlds or not? So it's not the same process as it used to be. For selection development camp, the one I oversee, we'll have 8 coxswains, 4 per gender. Every single coxswain will get to coxswain 8 at, it used to be Canamex. It's something different. Where we know what the regatta is. It's just logistical details that we're working out now, but it's going to be a unique regatta that everybody will get to participate in. And our goal is to develop you for that U23 senior national team. We're really focused on the long-term development. So there's a few little differences this year, but if you guys have questions, I'm super happy to answer them because I know it can be confusing.
Thank you for clarifying. The system changes, so definitely different, but I think the advice is still the same. Like
Yep.
when you get to the selection camp, it's like doing those simple things well and then continuing to add in the flair as you go. You make yourself stand out by being consistent, being good at the simple things, and doing your job well. Thank you for clarifying as well. Okay, I'm getting some more direct messages, so I'm going to read those out. First question, is there anything that you think would be good to make an impact as a freshman, or should we just focus on doing the simple things well to start? Great question. You're probably not going to be surprised when I say this, but I think doing the simple things well, like coming up, being on time, if not being a little bit early, doing your job to a high degree of fidelity and accuracy, and then asking questions. Like if you're doing those things I said, like showing up every day, asking questions, asking for feedback, that will make you stand out. Not every coxswain is asking for feedback. Not every coxswain is collaborating well with the coaching staff and with the other coxswains on the team. And not everyone is like really curious about driving the team forward. So I think if you can do those things on day one, everyone will be like, whoa, this girl is like, this girl, guy, individual, this person is going to be incredibly excited that you are curious and that you are interested in driving the team. If someone is a team player and they notice that about you, that's incredibly exciting. So I think emphasizing that on day one is really the big thing. And also like that kind of relieves some pressure. I remember I used to show up on like day one of selection camp and be like, I have to be perfect and be amazing and make myself stand out and all of these things. And then when I took that pressure off and was like, wait, I just need to be me. Like, I don't need to do anything special. I just need to do exactly what I know how to do and what I did in high school. It was so much more relaxed and allowed me to actually do my job well. When you go to college, you are recruited for being you. You aren't recruited for trying to be somebody else. So Caroline, was recruited for my abilities so I could show up on day one and be myself. And I found that incredibly liberating instead of trying to fit a mold of something else. Really focus on yourself, do what you know how to do, and be genuine and being curious and driving the team forward. Cool. Another question. How did you find managing being friends with your teammates while also being a leader, getting the work done, and bringing your team to the highest level? This is an excellent question. And I think it can be hard to balance. I really focus on like, there's a difference when you're on the water and off the water. When I'm in the dining hall with my teammates, I'm Caroline, a friend. I'm Caroline, a teammate. I'm like pretty silly, like to joke around, like to mess around. But on the water, it's business. This is my job. I am there to execute the practice. I am there to hold them to a standard. And if someone is not listening, someone is not doing something correctly, if my best friend is in bow seat and they're not getting their blade in, I'm going to let them know. It's direct. I treat everyone equally. I treat everyone with the same sense of you are my teammate. We all have the same goal. I'm going to hold you to the same standard. And I think the more that you can like get on the water and treat everyone the same, the better. When we're spinning, like if my best friend is in bow seat, I'll like make a joke or do something like that. But when you are in practice and you are in a session or in an erg session, treating everyone the exact same and with a high bar. So understanding that everyone is held to that same exact standard, even if they're your friend. Um, and like, for example, like in the dining hall, I'll be like dancing around with my friends, but I'm not doing that at the boathouse when we're about to launch. Um, so I think that's really important. It's just like, even like with the coxswains, like on land, we'll be joking around, messing around, but as soon as it's time to have a team meeting, like we lock in and it's like a different standard. And I would say usually like a good like idea for that is like when you're in the boathouse, when you're in the erg room, when you're in the weight room, like kind of locking in and finding that new switch so that you're able to focus on what your job is. Um, and like especially when I'm on like the national team level, like this is my job. Like yes, I'm doing this for fun, but this is my job. Like I was selected to do a very specific thing, and I do it because I have fun and I can do that. And then outside of practice, I can go to the movies. Like I can go grab coffee. I can do all that fun stuff. Um, but I think like the more that you're able to kind of draw that distinction between in and out of practice, the better. But I was also able to have unique relationships and friendships with every one of my teammates and like joke around with them, do fun things, do silly things, like go get lunch and not talk about rowing. And I found that really exciting. And also, like outside of practice, it can be uncomfortable. But if someone starts to talk about rowing or talk about practice outside of practice, and you're like, look, hey, you're my friend. Like, can we just not talk about rowing when we're not at practice? And I think that can be received really well, and allows you to just focus on your friendship outside of the sport. So sometimes setting those boundaries can be really nice. Okay, you want to read that next question?
Yeah. So was building trust with teammates, especially starting with in the varsity eight as a freshman, found with just being consistent and reliable, or did you do other specific things?
Yeah. Building trust with teammates was definitely being consistent and reliable. So I think they knew that anytime I was in an eight with them, that I was going to do things correctly. I was going to steer straight. I was selected to cox the head of the Charles, like literally 3 weeks into the school year. And I coxed our varsity eight. We won my freshman year. And I go back and listen to that recording. It is very simple. Like, I don't think I'm calling much, but what I'm doing is I'm steering the course really well. I'm telling them the meters and I'm telling them what their speed is. It is very simple, and I'm happy to share this with any of you. Um, but afterwards, I got incredible recognition from the team and the seniors that were in our boat of like, hey, Caroline, you are a freshman and we just won the head of the Charles. Like, yeah, it would have been cool if you had called some moves, but like you steered straight, you did your job, and you did exactly what we needed you to do. And I think that is what really gains trust is like being consistent. If one day you're able to steer and the next day you're just all over the place, like people can't trust what you're doing. And so I think like just doing things really consistently builds the most trust. And having your teammates back also. But I think like I remember that race being a moment where I went from like being like a new freshman that no one really knew to being like a freshman that people trusted and believed in and like knew could really help be a leader on the team was that race. Like when you have opportunities to be with maybe the older group, or if you have an opportunity to race at some point, just making sure that you do the little things right and with a high level of polish. Um, and I think that just goes so far. Awesome. Lily, I saw you had a question. or you mentioned something about the recording, but I'll put my email in the chat at the end, and anyone is welcome to shoot me a note. So, um, would love to keep answering any questions, whether it's about the transition to college, whether it's about like college generally, balancing school and life, and also athletics. Happy to chat through any of that. Um, but all great questions.
Yeah, and thank you guys for asking so many questions because I think if you have these questions, the people watching this recording later are going to have similar questions, so it's really valuable. Um, and yeah, if we have to end a little early, it's also okay if we end a little early.
Totally. Awesome. I think the thing I really want to emphasize, and I know I've said this a million times, is like showing up and making sure that you're not trying to be someone incredibly different on day one, but like you're just trying to do you and like do your thing. You're not expected to be doing some crazy, amazing thing that you've never done before, but showing up, keeping it simple, and doing what you were brought there to do. Be a coxswain, be a teammate, and really drive the team forward. I think that is so understated of it doesn't need to be complicated. It can be super simple and it can be doesn't need to be anything crazy. And I think that also, at least for me, like when I showed up to Olympic selection, relieved so much stress because I was like, I've done this before. Like I've coxed for 10 years and it's not anything different. I can show up to college and it's not anything different. Yes, there are some subtleties. Yes, the speed is a little different. Yes, they run things differently, but the core knowledge base, it's the same sport, it's the same role. It's nothing crazy. And I was recruited to be Caroline, not recruited to be someone else. So just really remembering that you have the toolkit to really do it. And it's just asking other people for support along the way. Other people want to help, so let them.
That's that's great advice, and I feel like that's a pretty good place to end it if you want to end it there. I will say that you guys should be able to get Caroline's email in her Sketch profile as well. So if you guys need access to it there,